Hello and welcome back to the Football House on House Enterprise, and happy Halloween from the House Enterprise crew. I'm Sam Basil, joined alongside Jake Zimmer, and we've got a special, festive, spooky episode of the Football House for you guys. As you guys can tell, Jake did not see my costume until the moment before we went on air. Jake, how you doing this week?
Oh man, a lot better now. You kept in our prep, you just turned the camera off. You're like, I have to make this a surprise, and I'm so glad you did. Where did you? Is this a new purchase or was this from the
Uh,
archives?
No, full disclosure. Full disclosure. I wore this like as just like my full-on Halloween costume 2 years ago. It is the official Adam West 1960s Batman costume from like whatever the big like Halloween costume distributor is online. And I bought it 2 years ago. It was a little pricey, so I figured I gotta get the most bang for my buck here and wear it for the show. And I think it's a pretty solid look here. So we're in week 10 now of the of the college football regular season. Things are heating up. Teams are becoming bowl eligible. We're starting to get a much better idea of the conference championship game picture, much better idea of the playoff picture, especially in the group of five bubble. And we're a week away from the first official college football playoff committee rankings. Those come out on November 5th. So we're downhill. We're flying downhill right now. And so we're here to bring you another great set of picks for what should be another fantastic slate of college football. Before we get into our picks, I also want to point out that, it's fall, it's spooky season. There's a chill in the air, and that means, baseball season's wrapped up, and we are fully immersed in college football, the NFL, and especially at our House of College Hoops, college basketball. So that's why we have this year for you guys the 2024-25 Everything College Basketball Magazine. This is something that we've been working on at the House of College Hoops with our staff and the Everything College Basketball crew for the past summer. It's comprehensive previews of all 364 teams in Division I basketball. We've got preseason awards for each conference and then preseason national awards, top 50 players in the nation from Screen the Screener. We've got people from Europe, from Canada. We've had coaches buying this magazine. So if you want to order yours today, head to ecbmagazine.bigcartel.com. And I would like to say that, there are not many more comprehensive tools to prepare you for this year's college basketball season than the 2024-25 Everything College Basketball Magazine. Let's get into a little bit of our, what we came here to talk about, and that's college football, starting off with our top 25. Top four, the top three schools here remain the same at Oregon, Georgia, Penn State. Texas, for the first time in a long time, is replaced in the top four by Miami. We've got a couple other risers, a couple other fallers. Ohio State taking a bit of a dip. Notre Dame, Clemson, Texas A&M on the rise. BYU on the rise. Ole Miss falling. And then Tulane and Washington State are, the newcomers in this week's poll. Jake, any thoughts on some big changes here? Anything that you would have liked to see that you feel like we might have missed out on? Anything that you could kind of expect this poll to set the tone for this week?
I wholeheartedly disagree on our group's decision to put Texas fifth and to drop them. Wholeheartedly disagree, right? I did not watch the Vanderbilt game. I do think, though, the score is a bit misleading. I think Texas was in control the whole game. They never really, until maybe there was a garbage time, not even garbage time, but the score is 27-17, and then Vandy throws a touchdown at 46 seconds. That's a misleading result because you look at that and say, wow, Texas almost had they had a near scare. I don't know. I just don't think that deserves to drop them out of the top 5 here. Again, I would have had more of a problem with this if the playoffs had not changed and they were on the outside looking in. It doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue for Texas as long as they take care of business the rest of the year. Yeah. Rest of the way, I'm on the BYU hype now. I think, oh man, what did they do last week? They, in week 9, had a commanding win over UCF, which we said they would. I think a lot of us were all in on BYU, who was plus money on the road. They proved us a lot. I think Clemson proved a lot too. They are they were 11 for me. I just think they need to do a little bit more to climb up the ladder, maybe a milestone win or two. Yeah, overall, I mean, I'm disappointed with Texas popping out, though. I will say Miami is a good football team. They have really good wins. But I think overall, like, this is where everybody should shake out.
Absolutely. Going back to Texas, I think one thing, like you said, the score is a bit misleading. It is a 3-point game. You know, I don't think Texas should have let up 24 points, even if 7 of those was a garbage time touchdown against Vanderbilt. They shouldn't have let up 24 points. A bright spot for Texas in comparison to the loss to Georgia is just the confidence they had at the quarterback position, right? Obviously, Quinn Ewers got off to a pretty rough start against the Bulldogs. They brought in Archie Manning, and then they realized that the reason why they were losing wasn't because they had Manning in or Ewers in. It was just because Georgia just played like the better team on all fronts, right? But I think, like we've said, we're kind of moving towards the downhill portion of the season. It's fun to get cute with your quarterbacks and switch them out and stuff, but at a certain point, when you're trying to lock in a spot for a conference championship game, you're trying to really clinch a playoff spot, like, you have to kind of make the decision to go, all right, this is going to be our guy for these next 4 crucial games and beyond. I think they did that, and I think that's something a big positive for Longhorns fans to take away from this game against Vanderbilt. Quinn Ewers, not the most flashy stat line. I mean, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. That's kind of like the big worry for me there. But as long as they have that confidence, they got to keep putting them in, keep pushing through that. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I concur here. Does the saga end now with Arch? That's the question, right? Like, do they put this to rest? Did he do enough to kind of have that back of the head voice say, should Arch be in? Right? Like, that constant aura. I think he's comfortably there, but we'll see how the rest of the season plays out.
Yeah, and it's not like I'm saying that he should never be in again, right, for the rest of the season, right? I think there are going to be certain game situations where, yeah, maybe it might be the better shot to put Archie in. Maybe there's a kind of like a sneak play you want to run. Maybe you like that certain matchup. But I think going forward, for the sake of the quarterback, the guys around him, and just the overall team's continuity, it's just nice to kind of set a guy like Ewers kind of in stone for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Looking on to a more detailed look at what I think the college football playoff is going to look like if the season ended today. Not a lot of change here. I have BYU hopping into the auto Big 12 spot over Iowa State, and I have Iowa State dropping all the way down to the 11th seed as a result of that. Texas moving down to the 7th seed. Penn State moving up. I think Penn State looks really good. We're going to get into them a little bit later tonight. Right behind them is their opponent this week, Ohio State. And then Boise State holding strong in that group of 5 auto bid at the 12 seed. A little bit more detailed look at that 12 seed. Here is my group of 5 bubble. A lot of change from last week. Last week's field, in my opinion, was Boise State, UNLV, Army, and Navy. UNLV obviously taking the loss to Boise State in a Friday night thriller, 29-24. I think at this point they are out. They are out of the playoffs. And if Boise State does not win the Mountain West, the representative for the college football playoff will likely be from the American Athletic Conference. Navy, I think, was a strong contender. I still think they're in it. They obviously took a very humbling loss to Notre Dame last week, but they're still undefeated in conference play. So that is the key there. But they are joined by, Tulane, who is kind of moving their way up there. They got a couple votes in the AP top 25. They cracked the bubble in our own football house top 25. And then Army kind of staying strong at 21, both in the AP and in the Football House top 25. Another school that I want to give a shout out to out of the Sun Belt, they did not get any votes in our top 25 or in the AP, but the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns are currently 7-1 in the Sun Belt. They've got good wins against Coastal Carolina, Appalachian State, Texas State. They got a crucial one coming up this weekend against Arkansas State.
Don't forget they beat Wake Forest on the road, too.
Yep, they also beat Wake Forest on the road.
That's wild.
And the one thing that could hurt them, if it comes down to it, though, is they have lost to Tulane. I think right now I have them on the bubble. I think they're a long shot, but I wanted to include them just to, kind of keep them in this discussion. A couple other schools that are just outside this top 4, obviously, I think Navy's still there. Memphis is still there. It's going to be really exciting. The American Athletic Conference Championship is going to be a dogfight.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially when you've got Navy in the mix in the American. You've got a lot of good schools there. I think back to Louisiana though, it's a team that I look at their metrics and I'm impressed with one thing more than others. They hold on to the football, right? Like they just move the ball. I look at third down conversions as one key metric of how your offense plays, and if you're not able to, or if you're not shooting yourself in the foot, they're 16th in the nation, right? They're converting 50% of the time on third down. So that's a group that we'll have to see. Got our eyes on here. We're not making any crazy, assumptions, but they have a tough Arkansas State team. They have South Alabama, who's 4-4. They have Troy, who's uncharacteristically 1-7. And then this is probably a rivalry game at the end of the year, but UL Monroe versus Louisiana. It's probably some sort of rivalry that they're closing off with. But who knows what happens in the Sun Belt too.
Yeah. And props to the Sun Belt. I mean, this is just like a weird hill that I will forever die on, but props to the Sun Belt for being the last conference in FBS football to use division standings. I've been pro divisions in conferences on this podcast before. We don't have to get into it tonight.
You sure have, yeah. Did we have one where you made your case for it? You must have at some point.
I have not. I'm working on a big piece about that, divisions both in college football and just in sports in general.
I feel like this has been in the works for several years now.
I know, and I've just been procrastinating. It takes a long time to put this costume on. I needed time for that.
It's hard being Bruce Wayne. Yeah.
Whoa.
Sorry. Oh, whoa, man. I didn't mean that.
Whoa.
Who's this Bruce Wayne guy you speak of?
Anyway, moving on from whatever Jake was talking about there. Let's get into our actual picks for this week. Again, the Football House.
Did you pull ahead of me? I thought I had a good week last week.
Yeah, I mean, you did have a bit of a good week, but I just had a little bit of better.
A bit of a good week.
I got his prep time. So,
I went 7-3.
Yeah.
Damn, that only brought me up that much. That sucks.
Well, again, a pretty good year for the Football House crew. Tondo obviously up there on the top.
No, nobody's going to catch him.
55-36. Yeah, I really think it's in terms of outright win total, I don't think anybody's going to catch him for the rest of the season. But we'll see. It'll be a mad dash come bowl season. So let's get into your card first, Jake. So give us your.
That's my record. There you go. Is that my actual record? All right, that makes me feel a lot better.
Start off with your regular picks, then get into your locks, and then hold off on your game of the week.
I sure will. Let's start with Iowa State, -13. And what's Iowa State ranked right now? And forget the AP, the Football House poll. They are. I don't have it up. I just have my.
They're 12th. They're 12th.
They're 12th. And what did I rank them? I ranked them 15th. All right.
Yep.
Well, regardless, I think this gives me the warm and fuzzy. The spread here. They're 13.5. Iowa State is 7-0. They're playing Texas Tech, who's 5-3. Look, Iowa State's 5 for their last 6 against the spread. They have the 7th best passing defense in the nation. They are projected by all models to win 41-19. Give me that shit. Very simple. So Iowa State is the first pick here. Illinois +3. All right. So Illinois burned me last week against Oregon. I made all these great claims about them and said, oh, well, they'll obviously keep it a 3-score game or less, and then they lost by 27. Look, I've been pretty high on Luke Altmaier, who transferred a couple of years ago. He didn't have a great game against Oregon. I think he completed half of his passes through a couple ducks, no pun intended. But I think he's primed for a good bounce back game at home. This is one where I look at Illinois, who's been ranked most of the year, and Minnesota's unranked, and Minnesota's got the money coming in on them. I maybe this is a trap line. I just don't understand this. So I like Illinois at plus money here as a home dog. I have Georgia -16, which has now gone to -14.5. A lot of money's coming in on Florida here. And I still love Georgia right now in this matchup. I think the Georgia defense hangs out to dry a Florida offense that I just haven't been too high on Florida. 4-3, they score a decent amount of points, I suppose, but all their big performances have been against crappy teams. Mississippi State was 45 points. Samford was 45 points. Kentucky was really their only kind of respectable win, but now Kentucky's 3-5. So we know kind of what Kentucky is here. You look at the games that against good opponents, and you see a 23-17 loss. You see to Tennessee. You see a 33-20 loss to A&M. You see a 41-17 loss at the beginning of the year to Miami. So I just think the Georgia defense shuts down this Florida offense. I think Georgia's offense is going to do what it does. They'll pick back up, after losing a couple of weeks ago. So I've been impressed, obviously, with the Georgia defense. I don't think many aren't at this point. All right, Cole's not here, so in his honor, South Carolina is playing A&M, and this show has an urge to pick against Texas A&M. But you look at the number here, right? I expected this to be a touchdown, right? Mike Elko, whether Cole likes it or not, has the best start for an A&M coach since 1917. Guy named Dana Bible leads this group to 7-1. You haven't heard of him because it was 100 years ago. South Carolina's lost 8 straight against ranked teams. This has all the recipe, Sam Basil, for a Texas A&M win. And it's Halloween, so I'm putting the cowboy hat on. Texas A&M over the Gamecocks. Free money at -2.5. So I hope – and Cole took this too, so he's hopefully not ashamed of this. We'll move on to Louisville, +11 versus Clemson. And look, Louisville's now 5-3, and they're trying to ward off 500, as crazy as that sounds. We were super high on Louisville. I was, one of the most high on them on this show, hand up there. And now it's a question of pride. They play a red-hot Clemson team. Clemson's kind of rising in the polls. They've got a little bit to prove now here, too. They're trying to be comfortably in the playoff. And my thought is, do they have enough in the tank to at least give Clemson some hardships here? I think so, strictly because they can move the ball really well still, right? It's been their defense that's let them down. I think Clemson and Louisville are some of the most high-powered offenses in the country, let alone the ACC. So I think that's good enough to make it a one-score game, simply put. I think this thing ends up as a shootout. You maybe consider the over, which is in play in this game. It's in the mid-60s at this point. So definitely an interesting one. I'm curious to see what the result is there. And then Navy versus Rice. Navy rushes for 267 yards a game. We saw what happened against Notre Dame. It was real hard for them, but they, even in that game, were still able to get over 220 on the ground. Blake Horvath, their quarterback, who we've talked about, has been really good on the rush. He rushed for 130 against Notre Dame. So I think good get-right game against Rice, who's 2-6. You pound the ground again, you shove it down their throat, you let the guys do their magic, and I think this gets out of hand pretty quickly. Navy gets back to the exciting brand of football we've seen them play this year.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to the PFL, the Pioneer Football League, which I did not know Butler was in before yesterday. But Butler is 6-2, and they're taking on a Stetson team that's 2-5. talk about moving the football. Butler averages almost 65 more yards than Stetson does per game. They rush. I've been super big run guy this whole time. They rush. They're 13th in the nation, or the FCS, I should say, compared to Stetson's 255. All the recipe of a Butler win out at I almost said Hinkle Fieldhouse. It's a Bud and Jackie Selleck Bowl in Indianapolis. That'd be cool if they played at Hinkle Fieldhouse, a football game.
Little arena football style with like the bouncy nets on both sides of the goalposts.
I like the sound of it. I like the sound of that. All right, and then my lock of the week here. This is tough, but Pitt +8 versus SMU. Now look, obviously you look at this line and say, what the hell? Why is an undefeated team laying 8 points against SMU? And this could go either way, to be honest. Like, SMU's at home, and that's the only reason why I'm hesitant to go after this. But Pittsburgh, I come back to their Thursday game against Syracuse last week, which was kind of, people were floating around like, must win, right? Like, Syracuse is good. I don't know. They might upset them. Pittsburgh manhandled them. Like, I do think this Pitt team is better than their perception right now. And they're 7-0, right? Like, this is a really good football team. What do they do well here, Basil? They score a lot of points. They score 41 points a game. They are 31st in the nation with almost 460 yards. They have really solid wins too. Like, this resume is really solid up and down. To the naked eye, you kind of say, well, no one is ranked. No one really catches my eye, but I still think North Carolina is a good football team. Even though they're 4-4, West Virginia is kind of in the same boat where they're in this hot seat kind of year for Neil Brown. And Syracuse, I think, has a solid resume, but Pitt beat up on them. So that's a reason I'm taking Pitt +8 here against SMU. My mantra this year has been trust the undefeated teams until they prove otherwise.
Absolutely.
So that's the mantra here.
It's interesting. Some of the picks on your card that I thought were really interesting too. Speaking about Texas A&M being, they're not your official lock of the week, but they're pretty close. Versus South Carolina. It's again one of those things, right? I think I talked about it last week where the context for that game for Texas A&M is vastly different than what it is for South Carolina, right? Like, Texas A&M, they're in the hunt. They are right now an at-large team, in my opinion, for the college football playoff. And so what they're playing for just means a lot more. Obviously, South Carolina, when it comes to being, in college basketball, to borrow a term from basketball, like, the term bracket buster, right? There is a lot of, not honor, but there's a lot of fun in that, right? It's something you want to root for as a fan of one of those schools. But I think the intensity and the will to try and get into the playoff kind of outweighs that a bit more. Same thing for Navy, right? Navy's still in the hunt. They're still in the Group of 5 hunt for the American. Their win against Notre Dame, their loss to Notre Dame last week, we alluded to, a bit humbling. They went down 14-0 in the first quarter, and it never really got that much closer after that. They ended up losing 51-14. What can Navy take from that and bring into the rest of the season to try and get back on top of the American?
Oh, man, I'm going to reiterate it. I think it's just honestly like a big positive is confidence in their rushing game. Like, you're still able to do that against a really solid Notre Dame defense. And defensively, Notre Dame is top 25, 30 in the nation in quite a few defensive categories here. So that's like, I look at that like, they've got stuff to fix to compete with the big boys, quote unquote. Like, you need to move the ball through the air. Like, they did not pass the ball efficiently. Defensively, they did not make the stops they needed to. So it's like, but you can build on that block of, we can shove it down their throats. Our running backs are going to make the right cuts. Our quarterback can bail. He can scramble. He can do all this crazy stuff. Kind of similar to the brand that Navy's played, but just hasn't had the horses in the barn. I think that's some really good learnings that they can put in their pocket from this one.
Absolutely. And then let's get into my card here. So I have a lot of similar picks. Again, I got Texas A&M -3 versus South Carolina. I think you had it slightly different. You had it minus 2.5. A lot of books are booking it pretty close. I've seen 2.5. I've seen 3. Just kind of depending on where you go.
And I found this yesterday too. Like money probably moved a little bit.
It's gonna move. It's gonna keep moving. I think in Texas A&M's favor. But it's just tough. But I think it's just gonna be that tight. I think Texas A&M's gonna take it in a close one. However close that may be, it might help or hurt them. It might be like a Texas Longhorns thing against Vanderbilt, where it's like they were up and then South Carolina kind of made it close, but never really actually had the time to kind of close it out. But I'm very excited to see what the Aggies do there. I've got Pitt plus 7.5 versus SMU. I'm a little confused as to why Pitt was an underdog in this matchup. I mean, I guess they're just giving it to the home Mustangs there. But I think they are a lot more poised to make a splash in this year's ACC. They're not going to be champions, but they are going to be kind of towards the top there, and they're going to get into a really solid bowl game that, one of those bowl games that the ACC aligns themselves with. And that'll be really fun to watch. UConn minus 8.5 versus Georgia State. The Huskies are 1 win away from being bowl eligible for the second year in a row. Jake, you're a Connecticut guy yourself. Could you talk about, have you heard any like rumblings? Like, are people talking about this in Connecticut, the New England area? Like, obviously UConn, back-to-back men's national basketball champions. So obviously a lot of the attention is focused there, but I think there is a contingency of people that really want to see a successful Huskies team. And it looks like Jim Mora is kind of building the foundation for that. So for you, I mean, what have you seen from the community there?
Yeah, I mean, I heard Jim Mora is actually he's joining the ballot in Connecticut as an independent presidential candidate. They love him so much there. No, I mean, it's kind of like an ongoing meme of UConn football and how they can't get it together, right? But this year, I mean, hey, they're 5-3. This is a long time coming. Mora, I had originally thought Mora missed his window to get out of there. Takes a struggling UConn program who hasn't had anything redeemable in the decade prior, takes them to 6-7, and they play in the Myrtle Beach Bowl against Marshall, where they got their ass kicked. But that's no need to dive into that. And then they went 3-9 last year, so everyone goes from calling him Mora to whatever, they suck again. But I think this year they probably. I mentioned about Navy. They finally have the horses in the barn, so to speak. They've got the right talent on the field, and it's the age-old debate: does them being independent help or hurt them? So I guess we'll have to find out against this key matchup for them against Georgia State.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, sorry to correct myself, not bowl eligible for the second year in a row, but for the second time in 3 years, which still for UConn football, that's
still pretty damn good.
Pretty astounding. I've got Illinois +3 versus Minnesota. Again, another confusing pick here where I think they were just leaning a little bit too close to the Gophers for some reason. I think this Illinois team is a very disciplined team. They play down and dirty. They control the ball really well. They don't turn it over a lot. So I think that's going to be something that's going to make the difference here against Minnesota. So I'm going to have them +3. USC Washington, really interesting matchup here. 2 4-4 teams in their first year in the Big Ten. They're one of these teams again, like they're out of the picture, right? They're out of the playoff picture. They're not going to make a huge splash in the Big Ten this year, but I think they're building towards something that could be really, really interesting. I took the under at 55.5 here. And what's crazy is, taking the under, you're kind of rooting for defense. You're kind of rooting for, a lack of scoring, right? But a line set at 55.5, I think still gives a lot of room for a lot of interesting plays. I mean, a 28-21 win by either team hits the under, right? So I'm going with the under here in what should be a pretty tight game. This one, UCF -6 versus Arizona, 2 bottom feeders in this year's Big 12. UCF is bad, Arizona worse. So I'm going with the 2017 Colley Matrix national champs here in this matchup. My FCS lock of the week is Villanova versus Hampton. Nova is a low-key FCS powerhouse. Never doubt the Wildcats when it comes to beating down on a kind of smaller FCS school. So give me the Cats in this one. My lock of the week, again, a really great historic rivalry, but not as close in years past. Georgia minus 14.5 versus Florida. Georgia, it's so hard to describe their role in this year's SEC because obviously they were preseason number one, but then they kind of slipped a little bit. They dropped the game to Alabama, which, that loss looks worse and worse now that Alabama's they dropped 2 games. But then they come against Texas. They win against Texas. So it's so hard to judge. And I think for Georgia to kind of really, continue to build more credibility and get closer and closer to a probable matchup with Texas. Or actually, let's talk about this for a second. In the standings in the SEC, because now, no one does divisions anymore. It's just going to be the number 1 team versus the number 2 team in the conference playing for the conference championship. Right now, it'd be Texas A&M, who's 5-0 in SEC play, versus Georgia, who's 4-1. So the Longhorns, even though they are a strong team to potentially win the national championship, they might not even be playing for an SEC championship, which I think would be just absolutely wild. But again, this win for Georgia would be huge in kind of just cementing their real identity for this season. Holding off on our game of the week, and then we're going to go into Cole's card. He's got the number 1 team in the country right now, Oregon, minus 14.5 versus the reigning national champs, Michigan. He's also got Indiana, one of the last remaining undefeated teams in the country, minus 8 versus Michigan State. Then he's sticking in the Big Ten. A lot of Big Ten on this card. Northwestern moneyline versus Purdue. And then he's joining you, Jake, Navy minus 11 versus Rice. Me and him match up here in our FCS pick of the week. He's got Villanova moneyline versus Hampton. And then his lock, which, I think we need to check in on Cole here, make sure he's feeling okay. He's locking in Texas A&M minus 2.5 versus
yes, you're right.
Carolina.
Yeah. Is the sky falling?
Yeah, exactly. Anything that jumps out to you about Cole's card? I mean, I think the biggest thing is Indiana, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Michigan State, I thought they kept it competitive last week, but it is what it is. No, love it. Roll Aggies, baby.
And now for our top dog, CEO of House Enterprise, Mr. Will Tondo here. He's going to continue his hot streak by picking Pitt plus 7.5 versus 7.5 versus SMU. He's got Buffalo money line in a little Maction versus Akron. Navy minus 10 versus Rice, taking a little bit closer than you and Cole. Then he's got Oregon minus 20 versus Michigan, taking that one a little bit further than Cole. Then Indiana minus 8 versus Michigan State. Duke plus 20, Miami money line.
I got questions about that, man.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We might have to get just an off the
Can we have a written statement? Yeah.
Yeah. About what's going on there. If you had to put yourself in Tondo's shoes for just a moment, why do you feel like he's got Duke plus 20, but Miami winning the game?
I'm trying to rationalize it, I guess, because they play a good pass defense. I don't know. That's the only thing. Miami is first in the nation in total yards, second in the nation in passing yards, first in the nation in points, and second on third down conversions. This is a good offense. Whether people like to give his face Cam Ward crap for some reason. They're like, oh, he sucks, whatever. I think he's been really good for this team, right? So
yeah.
I don't know. It's a tough one, Mr. Tondo.
It does have the makings of a trap game, I will say, just based off of
I would agree with you, but I feel like most of Miami's games have been trap games so far. I feel like they've just kept it close. You've got to think now the product is evolving. It's Florida, they've won handily, right? The bye games, they won. Virginia Tech, that game was crazy. That like last minute Hail Mary situation, 38-34. They did not cover the spread. They beat Cal by 1 on the road. They did not cover the spread. Louisville, they did not cover an 8-point spread, 52-45. They did not cover it. Florida State, I'm pretty sure they covered last week because I picked them. So I don't know. Are they? I see two schools of thought. Are they just a bad team against the spread? In which case, sure, pick Duke. Or are they going to, logic tells you they're going to bust out of this, right? Like they are. So that's where I lean personally. But I guess maybe that's the counter argument for Duke plus 20.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to talk about, they're talking about covering the spread. It's really tough because Miami is one of the last 4 or 5 teams in the country that is undefeated. They're one of the last 2 teams in their own conference that are undefeated. Them along with 7-0 Pitt. They've got 4 games left on their schedule. The Hurricanes. They've got Duke this week. They got Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. Heading into the ACC championship game, do you would you be willing to lock in a future on Miami winning all 4 of those games?
Oh man, what was it? It was Duke, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and Wake.
Yeah, in order, it's Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and then they finish the regular season on November 30th against Syracuse.
Yeah, just to win. Just to win, I would do that.
Yeah, win out. All right, maybe.
Yeah. So does that make them shit? They might. They kind of had a cupcake year of a schedule, though. Man,
yeah.
As it turns out. But if you think about it, who started the year ranked? It was Florida was probably up there. I would maybe say they were receiving votes.
Yeah.
Louisville was ranked. Florida State was definitely ranked.
Yeah. So it should have been. It's like.
Those are 3 ranked games to start the year, or close to ranked or RV games. Yeah, I get this was supposed to be the tough stretch for Miami, I guess. I don't know.
And like we're saying, it's a pretty easy stroll through the ACC. One thing I want to shout out on Tondo's card again, he's got Oklahoma for his FCS pick. He's got, which it's not really an FCS pick, but he's got Oklahoma minus 34.5 versus FCS Maine. By the way, speaking of Maine, I don't know for any of you college basketball fans who you should be ordering the ECB magazine. Speaking of Maine, Cooper Flagg's brother, Ace Flagg, just committed to play basketball at Maine.
Pretty wild.
That is pretty sick. He's a 3-star recruit out of the 2025 recruiting class. So that is very interesting. Hometown boy heading to the biggest, I think the only D1 school in the state, right?
Maine? Oh, you're gonna make me fact check this, aren't you?
I think they're the only
D1 schools in Maine. It is just
they're
Maine.
the only one. Just them.
I thought it crossed my mind of like Bates and Bowdoin and Colby and Thomas College was there one of them, but there is not. There absolutely is not.
And then Tondo's lock of the week is Army minus 22.5 versus Air Force. This is really interesting because if Army wins this game, for all you fans of the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy, which is, for those of you who don't know, the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy is a 3-team rivalry trophy between all the D1 service academies, so Army, Navy, Air Force. And if any school wins, if any school beats the other 2, they are, the winners of the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy. Army are the current holders of the trophy. They won it last year after beating both Air Force and Navy. And Navy has already won their matchup against Air Force. So if Army beats Air Force, then the control of the trophy comes down to the Army Navy game, which would be really, really fun. And then we're going to hold off on Tondo's game of the week because we are going to talk about the game of the week. That being this is the second week in a row that the game of the week is a noon game, which honestly I kind of appreciate. I love a nice,
high noon,
highly contentious noon game, and that is Ohio State versus Penn State at Beaver Stadium, Collegetown, Pennsylvania. This is going to be one of the most exciting matchups between these schools that we've seen probably in our lifetime. A very different team than Ryan Day has been used to, a much better Penn State team than Ryan Day and his Ohio State team have been going up against. What has James Franklin done for this Nittany Lions team that sets them apart from years past and gives them a legit shot to win the Big Ten this year?
It's a great question. I think I just want to try and prove a point here. Let me bring Penn State stats up, because I was talking about Penn State last year. Okay, so their defense is 12th in the nation. That makes sense, right? Like I don't know. The answer is defense for sure, right? Like Penn State, I thought, has closed out games. They've won different types of games. So kudos to James Franklin for that. But I also think like Drew Aller has come into his own this year, right? And he's not going to win the Heisman or anything like that. But I think the kid got a lot of crap in the offseason for, is he going to be the guy? All these sorts of things, right? And I think he's been the anchor of a team that is undefeated and the number 3 in the nation right now. So I think kudos to the coaching staff for giving the kid some confidence here going into that situation. It's super easy to kind of roll over and just say these are what the expectations are, play to those expectations, which were not great by all accounts, right? People had given the coaching staff a lot of crap for, it's Drew Aller, right? It's whatever. I think they've done a real solid job with him this year, and I think a lot of that goes back to the coach.
Absolutely. On the field, where do you think? Let's see what you've got. I don't want to spoil your pick, but where do you feel like Penn State could have an advantage here against Ohio State?
Oh man. Ohio State takes away Penn State's defensive advantage. It's the only thing, right? Like I feel like this game comes down to who's healthier, right? The Penn State D-line, like their front is one of the best in the nations, right? And they are clearly healthy. It's the offensive line situation it's a bit alarming to me right now for them, right? But Ohio State has a lot of injuries too. I think Penn State's might be a bit more impactful. I think it just comes down to whatever offensive line is healthier, to be honest. They're both really banged up right now. It sounds like Drew Aller's not even going to be at full strength for this game, too. Like he's battling a knee injury. So, yeah, Ohio State certainly has the advantage that their quarterback is healthy, and Drew Aller is not 100% here. So, like, tactically speaking, that's where I see the advantage.
Absolutely. And getting into our picks, we're all in unison here. We've all got Penn State +3. We've already done our locks, but how willing would you be to make that a lock?
I can't be a hypocrite here. I said earlier in the show, undefeated teams have the trust until they break them. Pitt is a great example. Miami is a great example. I got to ride the Nittany Lions here. I think they come out and win this game. I do. And I feel like Penn State is a better coach team here, right? And that's not to slight Ryan Day. I think he's done a good job at Ohio State. I just think Coach Franklin has done a better job at Penn State.
Yeah.
Ohio State's got some banged up offensive line guys as well of their own looking into it. But it seems like their issues just run a little bit deeper, right? Like I trust the young kid. I trust the team that's better coached in this situation, and I think they get a home win and maybe even slide up the standings to 2, depending on what happens with Georgia. I want to see how they play that, but if the card goes the way it should, then everything will stay the same up top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about this game also in relation to the Big Ten title race, because right now the top 4 in the conference, it's actually in first place in the Big Ten, because we're just going off conference records. They have a tiebreaker over Oregon. They're both 5-0 in Big Ten play so far.
Oh, God.
Penn State is 4-0. Ohio State is 3-1. That one loss obviously coming against the Ducks. Looking at the rest of these teams' schedules, out of those 4 teams, the only teams who will play each other later this season after this game is Ohio State and Indiana on November 23rd. Penn State does not play Indiana. They do not play Oregon. Indiana does not play Oregon or Penn State. Is this a crucial game? Is this a must-win game for Penn State to kind of stay in that picture? Do you see Indiana kind of making their way, or do you feel like they're gonna falter in that game against Ohio State and then kind of get out of the picture? Is Penn State?
All I know, like if Ohio State loses this game, that Indiana game is going to be a lot, right? Like that's how I look at this situation. I think because if Penn State loses against Ohio State, I mean, yeah, that game's still going to mean a lot against Indiana. But the Buckeyes take on Indiana. That game's going to mean a lot. Penn State, they don't have, because if they don't play Indiana, let's see what the rest of their schedule looks like here. It is, it's Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. That talk about a future I'd make for them to win all those games, no matter what happens here. Yeah, I'm taking that any day. Whereas Ohio State, India seems to be of more significance. So not panicking about Penn State if they lose this game, to be completely candid. I think Ohio State has more skin in the game. They need to win this game, I would say, because then if Indiana knocks them out, there's going to be riots in Columbus, Ohio.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Any thoughts on, so after this, by the time that we have our next Football House show, obviously these games will all have transpired, but we'll also get our first official college football playoff rankings from the committee. You think there's any room for surprise in these first rankings? I always feel like there's always a little bit of craziness. Obviously, there was a little bit more room for crazy results when it was the 4-team playoff, and then you just had the first 2 teams out. But with 12 teams, do you feel like there's still any room for the committee to surprise us with these first rankings?
My prediction with this is because it's so new, you kind of have to be conservative, right? You can't make any surprise picks and say, oh, look at this, right? Like to me, this is brand new. Everybody's getting their feet wet. They're just going to try to put their best foot forward because it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? So why piss a bunch of people off? Take the 12 best teams you've got and put them in there, right? That is completely my thought on this. I would be disappointed if they pulled off some kind of surprise here. I'll put it that way. There's no point. It's the first week in November. You let them ride. So yeah, I would be shocked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole point of this expansion, right, was to cut down on all surprises, which it stinks because I think there is a little bit of fun to that. There is a little bit of fun not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, but for the credibility of the college football playoff, for the the watchability of it, I think it's really important that we kind of stick to chalk as much as possible. And then once we get to the games, let those be the crazy result. Let the craziness happen on the field and not in some boardroom, right?
I agree. You need as much chalk as possible in these. Absolutely.
Yeah. So those are our cards for this week. If you still want to get some more information on our picks, make sure you head over to the blog at house-enterprise.com. Keep following us here on X. Keep following us on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, wherever you want to get the best college football coverage you can. Make sure you head over to our website so you can get your copy of the 2024-25 Everything College Basketball Magazine. And until next time, I'm Sam Basil. This has been I'm joined by Jake Zimmer. This has been I was trying to figure out a way to do that. But this has been the Football House Show. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.